G'day friends and fans. Welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War update for the 3rd of April 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate. I will continue to bring you unbiased coverage from the Ukraine War despite all the torrent of sobbing and smearing done by the pro-Ukrainians. The pro-Ukrainians do not like being told they're losing. If they were winning, I would tell them they're winning. But for some reason, they want to be told they're winning. They want their little boo-boos kissed as well and then tucked in at night. Both Ukraine and Russia have upped their warfare game. The amount of drone war going on is still actually quite less than that of Iran, which is weird, I know. The number of missile strikes by Russia today was less than that of Iran, just on Israel, which begs the question, and has a lot of people saying in Europe that Russia's a paper tiger. But if that was the case, why is Russia still advancing, and how is it that you're all scared to end the conflict? Well, that's because nuclear weapons. So Russia isn't a paper tiger, rather than one that is engaged in a carefully crafted campaign, strategically designed to wear out the Ukrainians and drive them out of the territory permanently. I don't know if this strategy will work. Honestly, Machiavelli said it best. You can create fear. But if you turn that fear into anger, you have lost. Okay? So, you can make threats. You have to be able to back them up. But there has to be a sort of, I think this is what's going on in Ukraine. Russia wants to give Ukraine a black eye. No doubt about it. But they don't want to give them two black eyes. That's why this war has been a grind. However, because so many people out there have the political maturity of a 5-year-old, they have to engage in smears when they don't get their way. Most of the people who are actually in Ukraine or pro-Ukrainian tend to be of Ukrainian descent. And of course, the majority of people in Europe really were ambivalent to this war until the continued political pressure. And at first, it was like fear had driven most of the people to support the war. But over the years, the support has continually declined. Now, support has faltered in Poland, right? For now, Poles wanting to feel strong are supporting Ukraine. But many, particularly farmers, they find the rhetoric, particularly the comparisons to World War II, both frightening and insulting. Because while in the back of their mind they are thinking, are they going to invade? When they found out that Belarus was building up its border, closing down its border because they feared a Polish invasion, the Poles felt at first insulted. But Poland has been also putting out this big fear that, the Russians are going to attack us. So a lot of people in Europe are now, still yet to realise how much the media has played them for fools. Because a lot of these statements now that have been publicised in the media are either being walked back months ago or were never made by the individuals, but rather spokespersons off the record. So we do not know right now official policy of Poland other than to support Ukraine. And I think the ultimate goal here of Poland is to develop and test their own defence industries because, like so many NATO countries, they realise the pathway to wealth is the defence industries. But around the world, we're going to see a cut in defence spending. A lot of countries are going to say, well, if Venezuela can fall in 3 months, we ain't got $1 trillion to fight. You see a lot of African countries not investing in tanks after the disaster. Well, some still have invested in tanks, that's true, but talk is a lot of African countries are considering no longer buying tanks because either they get 80s or 90s Soviet-era technology, which they've seen in Ukraine get blown to smithereens, or Chinese junk, which they've seen blown to smithereens, or broke down, and they can't afford American tanks. And believe it or not, a lot of countries around the world are looking whether or not they actually need. Look at, UAE, right? France, right? Wanted $3 billion off them for a suite of modern Raphael, and there were some disputes over how much technology sharing there would be. The whole point UAE and other countries signed up for the Raphael was the technological sharing, the ability to fix, repair, maintain, and upgrade your own equipment. Once you bought it, it was yours, unlike American jets, which, can only be fixed by American experts. Well, not entirely, but you know what I mean. There's a clear bunch of black boxes you're not allowed to touch. Otherwise, you void your warranty. They recall the aircraft, and that's quite an expensive proposition. Lack of support I've heard different stories, but apparently the UAE wanted, this is based on speculation by the media, that the UAE had asked for training and facilities for electro-optics because apparently electro-optics, that's the big buzzword, it's a technological gap, and the Arabs want to close the technological gap. We've heard this from Saudi Arabia and other countries. They want to develop certain industries across the Middle East, and one of them is electro-optics. And France, knowing that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, said no, they won't help them develop it, and they won't give away their technology. Now, you think normally, no, this is the problem with humanity in general. It's gone on in Russia and Ukraine. They've had many disputes before 2014 about technology because the Soviet Union did transfer a lot of electronics and a lot of industries to Soviet satellite countries to ease the financial burden, to extend supply chains, to lift production levels because Russia could not produce enough. And one of them is electro-optics, jet engines, and certain designs. That's why you have D-20s and other Soviet-era equipment, like, let's just call it the Armored Tractor. I can't exactly remember. And the BTR and the BMP all across Eastern Europe still. Now, they all... Poland has, I think, made the most changes to their equipment, whereas Ukraine has done the least. But homegrown equipment is now a talking point and a selling point. And the Europeans' arm industry has been now challenged by India. And a lot of people are looking at the Middle East, and they're industries seem to be more geared towards exporting of components. Now, France wants to maintain its independence of NATO for weapons, right? The French will only use French equipment. Yet, they don't like it when the Germans use German equipment. See, this is the problem with arms industries. They are creating conflicts by existing, by systemic pressure. The arms industry doesn't have to say, poke, poke, go out and start a war to prove the Leopard 2 and sell some more Leopards. No. The government has people thinking all the time how they can gain tactical advantage. And this is where we get to the proxy war in Ukraine. Now, there were, and the Russians pointed this out, and many other people across the world pointed out, CIA operations in Ukraine and incursions into Russia to steal technology. There's an infamous case where the head of one of the Russian development companies sold to the United States, I think it was the S-400, and the US also got hold of S-300 systems allegedly through Russian exports, where they would recover test firings and eventually piece together discarded, malfunctioned missiles that have been discarded on test sites. Particularly North Korea, who fires lots of stuff, and they want to be able to. You think, oh well, how's the US going to recover? Aren't they missiles and they hit the ocean at high speed, they're going to break up? Well, actually, a lot of test firings, they fire up into the atmosphere and have them parachute down so they can be recovered, but a lot of them sink before they can be recovered. And because they want to test them, right? They want to test them after they're fired. They fire them to the maximum range or maximum altitude, and then they recover them, which means they have to attach a parachute, not an explosive warhead. And this is how a lot of countries have recovered each other's air defences. Right now, the number one piece of equipment sold around the world is air defences. Heck, if I had money, I'd be putting money into anti-drone technologies. There are a number of emerging companies now in anti-drones. Not financial advice, not a financial advisor. I'm just saying what I would have done 2 years ago with the new drone companies. I think most of them by now have pretty much cemented, solidified. Probably Pakistan as and others, they're looking also to grow. Now, eventually you'll get too many, and this is what happened in the Soviet Union, you'll get too many companies all wanting to outdo Mother Russia. And this competition eventually comes to conflict. Now, the competition turning into conflict mostly led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. We see this angst of the Soviet Union living on decades later, because women aren't the only ones who can't let go of past pain. The majority of people are hanging on to angst over the Cold War, which they did not personally experience. Ukraine wanting to prove they're so tough is the problem. And the grind in Ukraine is the whole point, is to create fear without the anger. So every day, Ukraine has to create the anger by claiming Russia's killing civilians. Now, there's probably some civilian casualties. However, I suspect a lot of these attacks are directed at Ukrainian officers and Ukrainian officials of Ukraine's SBU. Because you've got to remember, up until 2014, Russia knew the majority of SBU, but already, see, in the 60s to 90s, the trust between Russia, Ukraine, and the rest of the Soviet Union was so strong, every year agencies would accredit their agents with the KGB. But around the 80s through to the 90s, due to high levels of Western infiltration, particularly Mossad, they started hiding their agents from lists because it had been long suspected that the KGB had been infiltrated. No, it was actually communications that out of Poland that had been infiltrated. But they didn't know that at the time, that a Polish officer was gathering information, leaking everything to the Germans, and then as the Soviet Union collapsed, he quietly went into West Germany and disappeared. And nobody really knows for certain the identity, but one of the high-ranking officials out of Poland helped bring about the end of the Soviet Union by pretty much announcing to the West all the agents of influence, whatever. Now, a lot of people were not arrested, okay? And a lot of people who were revealed were reporters who were paid to run negative stories. So this is why I have such a low trust level for most of the media, particularly out of Ukraine, because Ukraine was the source of the fight back to keep the Soviet Union. They were the ones pushing the Eastern Europeans to not leave, not join the EU. Now it's the other way around. And none of the surrounding countries like Ukraine, because Ukraine was the bulldog of the occupation force, right? They were the source of the revolution. Ukraine has a horrid history of genocides against other ethnicities in Ukraine, and horrific crimes against humanity, which went unprosecuted and most people don't know about today. Because you think the World War II was the only... no. So we actually have right now some growing markers on the battlefield, meaning the drone strikes are actually ongoing. About every hour, by the looks of these markers. But a few minutes ago, another cruise missile was flying, seen, and when I started recording, another cruise missile entered near Kharkiv. So Kharkiv is under heavy attack, and I was going to say that anyway. Kharkiv is under heavy attack. That's the title of today's video. It was originally just Ukraine, but yeah, I'm going to change it to Kharkiv. All right, so Kiev is getting hit. Kherson is getting hit. Odessa is getting hit again. They have a inbound missile. Now, remember, a lot of these missiles are traveling far, so they do have about an hour's warning. So, but where do you get the 6 minutes to Moscow? Well, I would say, maybe they're really talking about putting missiles up in Eastern Europe here, and Ukraine's a distraction. But UK wants to put a string of missiles across here, after the war, of course, because it's so stunning, so brave. No, I don't find proxy wars clever or fascinating. I think they're disgusting skullduggery. And the skullduggery behind them often includes murder of officials, bribery, blackmail, bullying of officials to carry out crimes against humanity just so you can gain economic advantage over. Because remember, the UK economy can't grow in Europe. It's stifled in Europe. That's why originally so many people wanted to exit. Starmer is trying to prove himself to the Europeans. You can come back, but you have to beg and all these other things, and you have to sign away all your rights for the next 100 years to the European Commissions. So, Europe is such a fascist state, and people don't want to admit it. And Ukraine is not politically aligned with the majority of European organisations. But see, what Europe is hoping is to wear down the Ukrainians and have the Greens and all the other left-wing movement and the socialists gain momentum in Ukraine. They're going to find that's what led to the Ukraine conflict in the first place, but they're thinking, nah, that's decades later. No, it's yeah. Now Ukraine is resisting a lot of the requirements for Europeanization. Now we used to call it romanticism, yeah, but because the word meaning of romance has taken on such a to romanticize meant to make you part of the Roman Empire. So much of that word has changed. So we have not many places, right? We have some advance towards Pishnia. We have advance towards Kharkiv, which is carryover from yesterday. They have only updated the map today. A few updates on the map. They've still haven't fully updated all this, but the Russians have advanced here up to a week ago. Right now they're preparing an offensive up here to sweep down and expand the buffer zone to and take the Lyman area. This is the Lyman area that they talked about, north of Savansk, and begin the systematic destruction of the Zelensky line and pushing the Ukrainians out of Donetsk. Now there is also a number of fronts. The Savansk front, there's been a number of small advances here, and by the Savansk front, I think they actually mean between Sevastopol and Savansk. So there's been some advances here, but it's been, according to Ukraine, we'll get to that later, they've halted most Russian advances today. So there's very little updates on the map. So Roddy's still holding on, even though there's been advances around. Roddy, as you can see, northern Pavlovsk has completely now been occupied by the Russians. The Ukrainian armed forces here had to retreat. The Russians are making more headway in Haishny, but the Ukrainians are not mentioning. There's a lot of things the Ukrainian news won't mention. They've made some advances here, not much elsewhere though. As we go around the map, they're only taken basically a few trench hopping operations here, nothing spectacular. A lot of these are trenches from previous years. Don't forget, the Russians were pushed back here several times, and they're now retaking territory they previously held. It's the same here. They're pushing to get back to where they were 2 years ago. I think 2 years, off and on. Back to all the way to 2022 anyway. Now, their aim, of course, is, now, allegedly, through Nikolaev, up over under these towns here, right, and slice through. Now, different strategic planners said, well, they can't make that in 2 months. They might be able to strategically cut down this line, but they will get nowhere near, and that's a huge, right, because nobody knows how Trump is going to respond June to July. Now, I reckon by the end of the month, all right, April, May, right, we're going to start to hear as Trump shifts his focus off Iran, which will be very quickly once the Epic Fury winds down. It'll be a very quick shift. There'll be a few quick ground strikes, which nobody will see coming, right? Or you can speculate all you want, and they get all the views, but I'm telling you, eventually I'm sick and tired of most military channels on YouTube because they couldn't predict the size of a barn. And I think it's because the whole point of military operations are particularly special forces, particularly paratroopers, is in, hit hard, out. I think they're going to hit and collapse some tunnels. They are waiting for the go orders. They are waiting for the pathfinders and scouts to finish their reports. Right, their reports are fitness and fitness operations appear to be building and house-to-house training and other things are going on in UAE right now, and there also looks like ongoing efforts to set up anti-drone operations and electronic warfare. So this looks like they are looking, and I think, to put people on ships. That's my prediction. I think they're going to put anti-drone operations, interceptors, and people on ships and start escorting ships out with a final line of defense of anti-boarding and anti-operations, as well as hitting ports and taking out IRGC, known IRGC from intelligence reports from men on the ground. They're just waiting for the go orders, and it'll be one big operation, right? It'll be 1 or 2 weeks, and once the ships are cleared, and America's going to hand to the Arabs, right, and see what happens, because once the first operation finishes, I believe that's when Trump needs congressional approval. And he'll shift to the next operation. He will not want to be bogged down in Congress. He will not want to lose momentum. He'd rather revisit Iran in 60 to 90 days than take the political risk of getting bogged down in lawsuits and lobbying. He'll let the Arabs do that. He'll let the UAE and all the other allies say, hey, we still need help. You got our ships out, but what are we going to do in the long term? And that's what Trump is talking about, telling the Europeans, hey, you want long term? You've got very few options. But there is one option people have forgotten: pipelines. Europe has to go into the Middle East and fund billions of dollars of pipelines and protect them, because you're not going to secure the Strait of Hormuz forever. It'll take an estimated 10 to 12 months to bring down the Iranian regime, because you've got to root them out now. The IRGC, they're going to be hiding amongst the civilian population, trying to carry out terror attacks to keep the people passive. They're going to continually make sure that the people can't build up enough numbers to threaten them. Biggest mistake Israel made was to arm nobody ahead of time. So there's no armed resistance. So civilians are not going to come out. They should have bought off the army when you had the chance. You don't anymore. Instead, that option is closed. Although we don't know if they tried, or we don't know if they succeeded. There's always a chance. Just like in Ukraine, there's always a chance that the army will turn against the government. Right? This is the biggest fear in Ukraine right now. This is the biggest fear in Iran right now, is the army will turn against them. Russia particularly does not care if the Ukraine army stops fighting or capitulating. They still work on taking in surrendered Ukrainians rather than killing them. But the viciousness of the Ukrainians has gotten to the point where most Russians are not sending out leaflets of calls for surrender. They're carrying out field operations to assassinate officers. And that is, again, where a lot of your drone strikes are. So I have no dog in the game, so I don't care either way. But Russia is adapting to drone warfare. Now, in their latest adaptation, I know it says protection shield designed to protect helicopters from drone strike. No, it's not some futuristic shield. It is an electromagnetic pulse that goes out and jams the electro-optic channels used by commercial and military optics. Now, there are things known as camera detectors. This is what they do when they sweep for bugs and other electronics. So they know the limitations of electronics. Now, these little suckers can apparently jam up to 3 different channels simultaneously. So Ukraine will have to... So, most drones only come with A and B, right? So you've got ABC jamming, which means it could jam up to 3 different drones. And they put up to 2 or more on these systems. Now, this is an updated electronic suite. And it is a 360 bubble, despite what it shows here. It is and it has already proven in the battlefield to enable against. Now, this is a simulation. They're not going to show you the real footage. But according to many blog reports, Russian helicopters in Sevastopol were able to successfully take off under fire because the drones could not reach them. Right? The Ukrainian drones at Sevastopol did cause damage on the ground, but the Russian helicopter, the helicopter base north of Sevastopol, were able to launch helicopters still, and despite all the Ukrainian claims, there is no proof Ukraine damaged anything other than the communications station. And they are actually now being deployed across the battlefield. They actually use a Russian military drone because they're on different channels. They set up they set up on stands, not drones, on stands, and string them along the front. So they're creating a operation, a shield, a border in Ukraine. And this border advances with them, this electronic warfare. Now, Ukraine's claiming to have taken an electronic warfare station worth $20 million. According to all blog searches and some military channels, they're nowhere near worth that much, okay? These little stations, they didn't take out a big electronic warfare station. They're not on the front. They do not put a multi-million-dollar electronic warfare station on the front line. These things have, right? These are spread out. And yes, artillery fire, rocket fire, or a drone swarm may actually hit one. Okay? Nothing is 100% guaranteed. But here you go. North of Sevastopol. According to Russian bloggers. Now, apparently these backpack equipment. So they're putting them in backpacks, bringing them up the front line, and basically, yeah. So it's not just helicopters. They're mounting them on tanks and
to intercept using conventional.
Yeah, using interceptors, using conventional first-person drones. Yeah, there you go. They are. That's these little radar stations to detect and disrupt drones. So it's not just the shield. Okay, so they have these tiny little warfare systems detecting drones all across Zaporizhia. And they're starting to spread out into other areas of Ukraine, across the Russian front. So they lost one. They're not worth $20 million. Heck, maybe it's a $20 million package, but how many of these radar systems are in these packages? You think these electronics are the cost of a home computer. Okay, they're not that expensive. In fact, most of consumer electronics and military electronics are way overpriced. But there you go. They're using these on various attack helicopters. They're using these to shut down the visual tracking of the optoelectrics, without which most interceptors cannot work. And as you can see, on the Kupiansk front, Russia's conducted several attacks. They didn't say, and they advance yet. And again, so there's no trusting Ukraine, right? Because Ukraine cannot, with one okay, you could go to Deep State map. The enemy is advanced near Pushkin. And even then, you go to the live map, and you could go through the different dates and see the changes to the map. But I am suspecting now Ukraine's Pravda, it could get away with printing lies and getting, because it's funded by the West, it's news for the West, it's not read in Ukraine, and I think these maps are limited in what they publish, and I think the average Ukrainian is just going to believe what they believe because they're nowhere near the war. The average Ukrainian is too busy trying to figure out where they're going to get their next meal from. And that is the tyranny of scarcity. And this has now enabled Ukrainian government to pretty much hold the balance of power in Ukraine, because anybody who goes against the government is branded a traitor, branded a Russian agent, and denied food. And because you can't leave Ukraine, you're a dead man. And the only way to get yourself out of to get food once you're branded a traitor is to go fight for Ukraine. And if you get captured, well, it's a death sentence for some. So it's a no-win situation in Ukraine. And Europe just sits there selfishly, does not adhere to any of its principles of human rights. It's amazing how hypocritical organisations become when all they can think about, and again, there was never about human rights. It was always about power and bullying the population, always voting against the right. They would say, "Oh, the right are going to violate human rights." Now, UAV operators claim Russia was cut off. Sorry, Ukrainians claim they cut off Russia from Starlink. Now, it was alleged that long-range Russian drones and frontline drones were linked to Starlink, and that's how they were able to penetrate Ukrainian air defenses. Well, apparently Russia launched a series of drone swarm attacks using fiber optic drones and radio bridges so that communications were always available. And as you can see, Russia engaged in long-range strikes all across without using. Now, Ukraine is now claiming they use Chinese satellites. Which is it? Did they use Starlink? Or is Starlink using Chinese satellites? Ukraine can't make up its mind. It's always got to lie. And it's getting to the point where we know that there are people out there now who are no longer thinking. They are just breathing and accepting anything they hear as the truth, particularly about Ukraine. But Europe is running out of patience. They don't know what to do. They went to check on the pipeline. They said, yeah, we'll help you rebuild it. Yes, Ukraine apparently agreed to let them inspect the pipeline agreement. Now, when the Ukrainian officials met with the European officials, showed up at the plant in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian officials told them the plant is closed and there'll be no inspections today. So and today they said drone strikes, that these were damaged in drone strikes. Now, Budapest has said no. They concreted, they blocked the pipes. We tried to inspect the pipes using the normal means, and no, we cannot get through. Ursula von der Leyen said, no, they've only turned off the valves. We'll go to Ukraine and we'll turn them on. Well, they went to the valve pumping station and they saw this, and you can see, this is a file photo, that they were turned away and it's blocked. Europe has finally admitted that the pipeline is blocked, but they won't say how. And Ukraine is demanding $90 billion, and they'll unblock the pipe. That's blackmail. Zelensky is a criminal. He's engaged in criminal activities, and the left is justified by saying, well, he's trying to defend his country, he has to, by all means necessary. So crimes are, the left is openly now saying that they are willing to allow Ukraine to commit any crime against humanity to defend itself. What happened to morality? There's no morality in politics. Oh, silly me. So, yesterday, of course, the Russians announced the liberation of LPR, and they've now increased their demands. Right, they're still under attack by Ukraine in the area. They've demanded Ukraine further withdraw. Now, this was a forced withdrawal. Ukraine did not voluntarily withdraw from the area. They were defeated. Either way, they want to further withdraw from the borders of Lugansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and, of course, Donetsk. And the Russians drove them out by force, inflicting heavy losses, according to Alice. Now, according to the casualty list, only 280 Ukrainians were killed, and Ukraine is claiming to have killed 1,100 something Russians. Well, if they killed that many Russians, how could Russia advance? Right, there are only 2,000 in the operation, so no. Now Zelensky claims. Now, according to Russia, Zelensky must make it clear, otherwise, now, Russia, of course, is pointing out that Iran is a disaster. I don't think so. I think Iran is exactly, it may not go the same way as Venezuela. Venezuela was different because there was an active opposition and the army took the side of the people, not the regime. Where in Iran, it looks like the army is going to take the side of the regime, and several IRGC generals are allegedly now trying to run the army. Things are disastrous, but both Russia and China appeared in the UN and abstained from voting for condemnation of Iran. The rest of the world condemned Iran for attacking the UAE. UAE and other countries said we were not party to this war. And apparently Ukraine was threatened by Iran openly in the UN, saying that they're now a party to the war and any Ukrainian in the Middle East is now a target. Iran is claiming the UAE and other countries are a target because they host US bases, and anybody hosting the US or Israel is going to suffer a huge defeat. So, again, do you see any of the left calling out Iran for their lies? No, but apparently they love to point out, they say, oh, lies are bad, and they point out Donald Trump, but they never point out, every politician exaggerates, but they never call out their own. They never call out anybody else. So there's no morality here. There's Keir Starmer, no morality. Okay, he'll never accept responsibility. The British people have to stop coping and start realising that It's not just Keir Starmer. It's the left, okay? It's the entire establishment. I know it's a very difficult thing to realise and wake up that a third of your country are traitors and want to flood the country with foreigners because they will have no love for the native population, so they're happy to be a bootlicker, a occupier, and the left thinks they're going to be perpetually in power. That's not how it works, okay? You bring people... It's like how the Maharajas brought in the British Army. The British took over. That's exactly what the Indians will do to you. They will take over. Heck, you already had Rishi Sunak, who openly said, I'm an Indian Prime Minister in England. The Tories, it's like the political parties in Ukraine. The people of Ukraine have to stop voting for political parties and start holding people account for all the theft that's going on. It's so rampant that you pretty much fill your jails in Ukraine with corrupt politicians. But now we've had so many flee Ukraine, and how is that possible when there was, oh, he's wanted, and 24 hours later, oh, he somehow escaped. Yeah. Which embassy did he walk into? Right? What's really going on in Ukraine? Yeah. That's what a lot of people are wondering, but less and less people, I know, but more people are coming to my channel for the truth. And the truth is, right, the mainstream media will never tell you what's going on in Ukraine. And more people in Ukraine, okay, there's very hard to find Telegram because they get shut down all the time. Ukrainian protests are shut down all the time. There's food shortages in Ukraine, yet American deliveries are still made. They keep talking about how America's withholding arms. That is not true. That's been debunked by Pete Hegseth and many others. And even congressional flights to Ukraine have come back and silent. So you think if there was Maxine Waters and other Ukrainian glazers would be out there. No, even Nancy Pelosi is silent. They know the weapons are being delivered. They know what happened when they get there. They've probably seen at the airport in Poland, they're not flying directly into Ukraine, that Ukrainian weapons are being loaded onto Ukrainian trucks, and they're not going to Ukraine, they're going north to the ports. They're selling the weapon. Ukraine is selling at least a third of the weapons that are sent there to Finland, to Poland, to Romania, and I believe some to Hungary and Slovakia. Right? Because Eastern Europe has been convinced by NATO that there's going to be a Russian invasion, that as soon as the line collapses in Ukraine. Now, I think Eastern Europe is smart enough to realise that they probably do need to up their game because but they don't think Russia is going to, and many, including Hungary, think Russia's not going to advance past the line. I think the Americans have put down a red line, and Putin's going to fight up and to an inch or two of that red line, and that is as far as they're going to go. But Russia's not going to make it. They're not going to make the deadline, and they're not going to make the red line. So we got 2 more months before we see whether or not Trump puts his foot down. And we all know Trump starts to put his foot down early every time. There's no way, right, that he cannot afford to go hard at Ukraine coming up to the election. We all know politically 40% of Americans support Ukraine. We know that 55% of Americans strongly approve of Trump. We know that 55% of Americans strongly disapprove of the Democrat Party. We know the gap is going to close as campaigning starts to ramp up. And we know that Ukraine is going to be a hot topic. So Trump has to try to get something. But Ukraine is always going to be stubborn because the left will never hold Ukraine to account. Just like the left never hold Israel to account unless it's a Republican president. because they know the fallout lands on the Republicans, not on the Democrats who instigated the mess 47 years ago. Or under Obama for delivering pallets of cash. And Obama claiming that we stopped the nuclear program. No, you didn't. It went underground and you just failed to report it. Like anything else, the left, if they don't see it on CNN or ABC or New York Times, they claim it doesn't exist. They claim everything on Fox News is disinformation. And it doesn't work well when the right is also claiming fake news and from Fox, for your phone news. It's the most trusted news in the world. It's just, unfortunately, the loudest voices in the room do not actually understand political smearing and smear campaigns. How they try to degrade, that they can't win by merit, they have to degrade others. Zelensky knows he cannot win the military fight, but he wants to win the political fight. And that is to keep Ukraine from collapsing and keep enough pressure on Russia. But if Russia doesn't collapse and Russia is winning with less troops and less equipment than the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have far more equipment than they need, and they're selling it off, yet they keep demanding more. This war ain't costing $127 billion a year. Remember, they've had how many loans now? They've had nearly $800 billion in loans. In 3 years, they've spent nearly $1 trillion. Or €1 trillion. And most of that's come from the US. And they want now $90 billion a month. They can't sustain this. Europe can't sustain this. Poland, you're bleeding your treasure. You'll never get it back. You can not get... The moment these theoretical $1 trillion mines open up, it's going to take decades. It's going to take over 18 years to build one of the... plus, you've got no way to process it, because it's not just the mine they have to build. It's the ports, it's the infrastructure, it's the electricity, it's the processing. These minerals are not going to flow. Trump said it. These mineral deal, the minerals won't flow for 20 years, at least. It's going to be, and it's going to take decades to mine it all, and rebuilding Ukraine is going to never be repaid. It'll be for 100 years. This is all theoretical, though. The markets could change. Technology could change. The demand. Brazil could turn around, or one of many countries could turn around. Japan could suddenly turn around tomorrow and say, hey, we found another node. And that will severely downgrade the cost of, it'll severely downgrade Ukraine. Japan's been searching the seabed for minerals and finding some. And apparently some can be as big as the state of Maryland. That's one hell of a mine. But getting those resources off the seabed is why the resources are so high. But if they're getting these minerals out of the ground, there'll be a shift. Just like production in China has downgraded to cut off the world market to keep the prices high. So, look at the economic side of the war and you'll see there's no morality. There's no morality in Europe right now. It's all one big, let's destroy Russia so that we can grow our economy because it's the only way to grow. It's stupid boomonomics that the numbers always have to go up. No, they don't. And it's about time we had deflation in the West to cut the cost of living. And we start with politicians' wages, I reckon. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. You support me on Patreon. Buy my books. Buy my merch. Thank you, each and every one of you. I really appreciate all of you. About 75% of you don't subscribe. But please, can you hit that like button, comment? And according to YouTube, the view count they know the view count on some channels is broken. And yeah, So, thumbs up, please. Send a clear message. If you really hate the war, you really want to end this war, you got to start. You can't let the left win any elections because they will continue the Ukraine war. Bye for now.